Have you ever met someone whose presence felt like peace, but whose eyes whispered sorrow? They are kind, always kind. They say it's okay more than they should. They give you the last piece of cake. They remember your birthday even when you forgot theirs. They listen endlessly, and when they hurt, they smile through it. They are the good child. But goodness, when born from fear, is a wound wrapped in velvet. So why is it that the ones who never caused a storm carry the heaviest silence? Let's begin. The good child learns early that love is conditional. They observe, they adapt, they shrink. When their mother cries, they become quiet. When their father rages, they become obedient. When the room tenses, they sense it first. Like a radar for other people's moods, they calibrate themselves to survive. Not to be themselves, to survive. And so begins the performance. They learn that their own anger is dangerous, that asking for too much is selfish, that being too loud, too sad, too joyful even, might cause rejection. So they dim, they excel in school, they make the bed, they apologize first, they don't fight back. They become everything their parents, teachers, society wants, and in doing so, forget who they were before the praise. And here lies the paradox. The world rewards them for their compliance. She's such a sweet girl. He never causes trouble. She's so mature for her age. But maturity born from trauma isn't growth, it's suppression. Do you ever feel like someone finally sees the part of you you've always hidden? Here, you don't have to hide anymore. You're safe now. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so we can keep walking this path together. Thank you. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." The good child becomes the vessel. They carry their parents' unmet dreams. They absorb the emotional volatility of the household. They become peacekeepers, therapists, emotional regulators, roles no child should ever play. And while others rebel, break rules, or scream into the void, the good child goes silent. They become the adult in the room far too soon. And this is where the wound deepens, because the world does not see their pain, because they learn to bleed without making a mess. Imagine a child crying internally, yet folding laundry to soothe their mother. Imagine a child hiding their report card, not because they failed, but because they came second. Not good enough, not perfect enough. So they smile. This smile becomes armor. But armor is heavy, and no one asks why they're tired, because they always say they're okay. Do you see yourself in this? Have you ever felt like being good was the only way to be loved? Like if you stop giving, you'll be forgotten. Like if you stop smiling, you'll be left. This is not love, this is survival. The good child grows up. But inside them, the child still waits. To be held without having to perform. To be loved without having to please. To exist without being perfect. And yet, that child keeps the mask on. Because removing it means confronting all the years they were never chosen for who they are, but for who they pretended to be. So the wound stays hidden, beautifully wrapped. But make no mistake, it bleeds. And if love was something they had to earn, then they'll spend their whole life never feeling worthy of it. But what happens when the good child finally stops being good? There is a moment when you say yes, while everything in you screams no. A moment when your chest tightens, but your lips stretch into a smile. A moment when someone takes and you give. Again, it happens so quietly, so repeatedly, until one day you don't recognize yourself anymore. Not because you changed, but because you disappeared. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt imprisoned by your own kindness? Kindness is a virtue, but not when it becomes your only currency. The good child learns early. Love is earned through service. They hold doors, they carry burdens, they clean up messes they didn't make. Not out of joy, but out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of abandonment. They say it's fine when it's not. They forgive too quickly. They understand too much. They become what Carl Jung would call a persona, a carefully constructed image built to survive the demands of the outer world. And what is that image? The helper, the fixer, the one who always shows up. But inside, resentment brews, because giving without boundaries is not love. It's self-erasure. They confuse guilt with goodness. They believe saying no is cruelty. They fear that asserting their needs makes them unlovable. So they continue giving, smiling, nodding, until their inner world collapses. And still, no one notices, because the world is addicted to what they offer: stability, patience, gentleness. The world does not ask if they are okay. The world just takes. Jung teaches us that anything unconscious will rule our life, and we will call it fate. The good child thinks they just attract narcissists. They think it's bad luck to always be the one who loves more. They think it's their role to heal others. But it's not fate. It's a wound playing dress-up. You see, when a child learns that love equals pleasing, they grow into adults who confuse peace with people-pleasing. They smile during disrespect. They comfort those who hurt them. They apologize when they cry. They do everything except say what they truly feel. Because saying the truth, it risks losing people. And to the good child, loss feels like death. So they avoid conflict like fire. They absorb pain like a sponge. They become experts at emotional management, everyone's except their own. And the kindness, it becomes a cage, a beautiful golden cage, with applause from the outside and silence on the inside. The good child never learned to say, "I need." They were too busy being what others needed. Do you understand this exhaustion? Not the tiredness from work or lack of sleep, but the bone-deep fatigue from not being allowed to just be. Every room you enter, you scan. Every conversation, you monitor. Every decision, you calculate. Will they still love me if I disappoint them? This is not compassion. This is captivity. And the cost? Your truth. Your needs, your identity. What happens when you are always the listener, never the speaker? What happens when everyone leans on you, but you have no one to lean on? What happens when your presence heals others, but no one knows you're bleeding? You disappear, not physically, but energetically. You fade into the background of your own life. And the tragedy? No one notices. Because you taught them not to. You made it look easy. You made it look effortless. You made your pain invisible. Because to be seen, truly seen, would require you to put down the mask. And that is terrifying. The good child becomes the tired adult, and tired adults eventually break. Not in fire, but in silence. One day they stop texting back. They stop showing up. They stop smiling. And the world says, "You've changed." But they didn't change. They just stopped performing. They finally looked in the mirror and said, "I can't do this anymore." And that moment, painful as it is sacred. Because it's the beginning of reclaiming the self. But what comes next? What happens when the good child walks away from their role? It doesn't begin with a scream. It It begins with not replying to a message, with turning off the phone, with staying home when you've always said yes. It begins quietly, like a tide pulling back before a wave. Have you ever felt it? That quiet refusal growing inside you. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you finally realize you're the one bleeding. There is a moment in the life of every good child when something cracks. A sentence spoken too casually, a friend who only calls to unload, a lover who takes and takes, then accuses you of being distant when you fall silent. And suddenly, the weight becomes unbearable. Not all rebellions are loud. Some are soft, deliberate, ruthless in their silence. You stop explaining yourself. You stop fixing broken people. You stop proving your worth. And for the first time, you let the discomfort sit. You let people be disappointed. You let yourself be misunderstood. You let the world react without rushing to save it. This is not cruelty. This is resurrection. Because for so long, your identity was built on reaction, on pleasing, on smoothing, on shrinking. But deep beneath all that kindness, there is rage, not the explosive kind, but the ancient one. The rage of a child who was never allowed to cry, who held the family together while falling apart inside. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress to be accepted. For the good child, the shadow is full of things they were told were too much. Anger, neediness, jealousy, boundaries, power. But what happens when the shadow grows too big? It doesn't stay silent. It begins to sabotage your relationships. You lash out at the wrong time. You cry over small things. You feel numb during joy. Not because you're broken, but because you're fragmented. You were never allowed to be whole. And now, the rebellion is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming what you buried. So you begin. You say no without explanation. You rest without guilt. You ask for what you need, even if your voice shakes. And yes, it's terrifying, because people leave. Some call you selfish. Others say, you've changed. But what they really mean is, you're no longer easy to control, because your kindness used to serve them. Now it serves you. And that changes everything. You begin to mourn the identity you built, the one who was always there for others, the one who was praised for being selfless. You realize that being good cost you your truth. You remember moments when you laughed on the outside, but screamed inside. Moments when you were praised for endurance, not knowing it was pain being mistaken for strength. You start seeing clearly. The friends who only come when they need something. The family that uses guilt as a leash. The lovers who love your softness but not your truth. You don't hate them. You just stop betraying yourself for them. And in that shift, you feel powerful and alone. Because walking away from dysfunction means walking into silence. You sit in that silence. It feels hollow at first. No applause, no validation, no one saying, you're such a good person. Just you, and the echo of your unmet needs. But then, something miraculous happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. It's shaky, rusty, unsure, but it's yours. You ask yourself, what do I want? What do I love? Who am I when no one is watching? And the answers scare you, because they are real, because they don't align with who you've been pretending to be. But this is the price of awakening, the death of the mask, the birth of the self. You look in the mirror and see someone unfamiliar, not because they're false, but because they've been hidden for too long. This is the silent rebellion. You don't burn bridges, you stop watering dead ones. You don't scream, you stop explaining. You don't hate, you stop betraying yourself in the name of love. And so the good child disappears, not into darkness, but into truth. What emerges is not a villain, but a self you've never met. Stronger, sharper, softer, but only where softness is sacred. No longer begging to be loved, no longer addicted to approval, no longer dancing for crumbs. You walk away, and for the first time in your life, you walk toward yourself. But healing is not the end, it's only the shedding. What lies beyond the rebellion? You think you've healed. You say no now. You set boundaries. You've left the roles that kept you caged. But then, a text goes unanswered and you panic. A silence stretches too long and you shrink. A loved one withdraws affection and the ground beneath you cracks. You thought you had grown, but something small inside still aches to be chosen, still pleads, still performs, still fears being abandoned. Because healing doesn't start with letting go. It starts with going back, beneath the rebellion, beneath the strength, beneath the fierce new boundaries. There is still a child who once made themselves invisible to stay safe, a child who associated stillness with danger, a child who confused rejection with self-worth. Carl Jung called this inner presence the inner child. Not metaphorical, but real, a psychic imprint, a wound that time alone cannot erase. And for the good child, this inner figure is exhausted. She sits in the corner of your psyche, knees tucked to her chest, watching. Every time someone raises their voice, she flinches. Every time someone leaves, she whispers, "It's because of me." Every time you fail, she repeats the script she was handed. You are not enough. You cannot silence her. You cannot outgrow her, because she is not your weakness. She is your root. And for the first time, you must go to her. Not as a parent rushing to fix, not as a judge rushing to shame, but as presence. You sit with her, you listen, and what she says will devastate you. She tells you she tried her best. She tells you she smiled because crying made them angry. She tells you she never wanted to be good. She just didn't want to be left. And maybe for the first time in your life, you cry not because you're broken, but because someone finally heard her. This is not weakness. This is return. Because before the mask, before the adaptation, before the image, there was only this, a need to be loved just as you are. But what happens when that love never came? You didn't stop needing it, you simply redirected it into achievement, into people-pleasing, into perfection. You began loving others the way you wanted to be loved, completely, endlessly, without asking for anything in return. And yet, every relationship left you emptier. Every sacrifice left you more hollow, because you were not loving. You were reenacting the original wound, hoping that this time someone would stay, that this time someone would see. But they didn't. Not because you are unworthy, but because they were never meant to be your salvation. They were mirrors, reflecting the parts of you that still seek from the outside what was always missing inside. And this is where healing deepens. You stop looking for a parent in your partner. You stop asking friends to fill the hole your childhood left. You stop believing that one more sacrifice, one more gift, one more yes will make you lovable. Instead, you return to that child again and again, and you give her what no one else did. You tell her, you don't have to be perfect. You tell her, I'm not going anywhere. You tell her, you matter even when you're messy. And she doesn't believe you at first. She tests you. She withdraws. She watches for punishment. But you stay. And in that staying, you break the cycle. Not with force, not with therapy jargon, but with radical presence. Because healing is not an event. It is a relationship with yourself. You stop abandoning yourself when others do. You stop betraying yourself to stay close to someone else. You stop punishing yourself for feeling. And the world, it shifts. You begin to notice. Your body no longer tightens around rejection. Your mind no longer spirals around being misunderstood. Your worth no longer depends on who stays. This is the deepest liberation. The good child no longer performs. The adult no longer overcompensates. The self finally breathes, and slowly the identity built on wounds gives way to something quieter, gentler, something true. You don't need to prove, you don't need to fix, you don't need to earn, you just need to be. And being, after years of performing, feels like rebellion. Carl Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." You no longer condemn the child, you welcome her, and in doing so, you welcome yourself back. This is not the end, because knowing your worth and living it are two different things. Knowing you deserve love is easy when you're alone. Living that truth when someone tries to manipulate, gaslight, or leave you, that's the work. But now, you have something you didn't have before, a self that no longer disappears, a voice that no longer whispers, a child who no longer hides. So what happens when this new self walks into the world? When the healed good child becomes whole, you wake up, and something is different. You don't rush to respond. You don't brace for rejection. You don't feel the urge to prove anything. There's still fear, still doubt, still remnants of the past. But beneath it, there is stillness. Not the kind that comes from being good, the kind that comes from being real. Can you feel that? That subtle shift? It's not perfection. It's presence. It's you. The journey ends not in applause, not in clarity, not in others finally understanding your worth. It ends in wholeness, and wholeness is not what you think. It is not calm all the time. It is not kind all the time. It is not easy to love. Wholeness is being true, not being liked. It is showing up with your mess, not hiding it. It is letting people misunderstand you and still choosing not to shrink. The good child wanted peace at any cost. The whole self chooses truth, even if it costs peace. Carl Jung said, "I'd rather be whole than good." And now you understand. You are no longer performing. You do not smile to be accepted. You smile when something moves you. You do not say yes out of fear. You say yes because you mean it. You do not chase closeness with those who drain you. You let them walk. And strangely, you are lonelier but more fulfilled. Because for the first time, the loneliness is honest. It is not the loneliness of being surrounded and unseen. It is the quiet space of no longer abandoning yourself for company. You begin to attract differently. Not because you are better, but because you are clear. You no longer draw in those who feed off your silence. You no longer mistake intensity for love. You no longer confuse pain with meaning. You do not beg. You do not chase. You do not explain. You simply stand. And in that standing, something wild begins to bloom inside you. Power. Not dominance. Not aggression, the quiet, steady flame of someone who no longer apologizes for existing. You become direct, clear, present. You listen when you want. You walk away when you must. You no longer split yourself into fragments to be digestible. You are no longer afraid of being too much. Because what's real can't be too much. It can only be misaligned. You begin to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. You forgive the parent who made love conditional. You forgive the teacher who praised your obedience. You forgive the friend who only came when they needed. And more than anything, you forgive yourself for staying too long, for bending too far, for believing that love must be earned. Because now, you know, love that must be earned is not love. Peace that requires performance is not peace. Kindness that erases you is not virtue. So you live differently now. You speak slowly. You choose deliberately. You protect fiercely. Not to be feared, but to be free. You become someone who no longer walks into rooms asking, "What do they need from me?" You walk in asking, "What do I need here?" And if the answer is nothing, you walk out. You don't try to fix people anymore. You don't mold yourself to keep them close. You don't make excuses for their inability to meet you. You meet yourself instead, in small ways, in quiet rituals, in the everyday act of choosing truth over comfort. This is adulthood, not age, but self-responsibility. You no longer wait to be saved. You no longer wait to be chosen. You no longer wait to be understood. You do the choosing. You do the saving. You do the seeing. And the result? Peace. Not perfection, not certainty, not unshakable confidence, but peace. The kind that comes when nothing outside you defines what's inside you. You were the good child. You tried so hard. You gave everything. You were never the problem. But now, you are no longer the child. You are no longer the role. You are no longer waiting. You are here. You are whole. You are free. And that is enough.